Guys, so in a shocking twist, the Episcopal Church in the US has decided to, they've refused to resettle some of these Afrikaners who have actually arrived South Africa based on what they call a moral contradiction. All right, so the leader of the church sent a letter. I think this church is popular and actually has, connections with Desmond Tutu. I think it has been at the forefront of fighting for racial justice ever since the days of apartheid going forward. And they see a certain kind of contradiction to this President Trump's approach to resettling Afrikaner refugees in the US. And so I just want us to quickly go through the letter so we understand the thinking from this church, this Episcopal Church, on what it is that they find as a problem, with refugees from South Africa being resettled as in the US from their own perspective. So the letter reads, it was written on May the 12th, 2025. It's actually there online in the episcopalchurch.org website. All right, but let's just quickly understand quickly. It says, letter from presiding Bishop Sean Rowe on Episcopal Migration Ministries. All right, so I think this they have a wing that is a migration, or probably is even a migration ministry anyway. So it says, dear people of God in the Episcopal Church, I'm writing today with some significant news about Episcopal Migration Ministries, the organization that leads the Episcopal Church's refugee resettlement ministry. It says, since January, the previously bipartisan U.S. refugee admissions program in which we participate has essentially shut down. Virtually, no new refugees have arrived. Hundreds of staff in resettlement agencies around the country have been laid off, and funding for resettling refugees who have already arrived has been uncertain. Then, just over 2 weeks ago, the federal government informed Episcopal Migration Ministries that under the terms of our federal grant, we are expected to resettle white Afrikaners from South Africa, whom the U.S. government has classified as refugees. The letter goes on to say, in light of our church's steadfast commitment to racial justice and reconciliation of our historical ties with the Anglican Church of South Africa, we are not able to take this step. Accordingly, we have determined that by the end of the federal fiscal year, we will conclude our refugee resettlement grant agreement with the U.S. federal government. I want to be very clear about why we made this decision and what we believe lies ahead for Episcopal Migration Ministry's vital work. It has been painful to watch one group of refugees selected in a highly unusual manner receive preferential treatment over many others who have been waiting in refugee camps or dangerous conditions for years. I am saddened and ashamed that many of the refugees who are being denied entrance to the United States are brave people who worked alongside our military in Iraq and Afghanistan and now face danger at home because of their service to our country. I also grieve that victims of religious persecution, including Christians, have not been granted refuge in recent months. As Christians, we must be guided not by political vagaries, but by the sure and certain knowledge that the kingdom of God is revealed to us in the struggles of those on the margins. Jesus tells us to care for the people and vulnerable as we would care for him, and we must follow that command. Right now, what that means is ending our participation in the federal government's refugee resettlement program and investing our resources in serving migrants in other ways. For nearly 40 years, Episcopal Migration Ministries has put hands and feet on our church's commitment to seek and serve Christ in migrants and refugees. We have served nearly 110,000 refugees during this time, many of whom are now American citizens and beloved members of our communities, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Over the years, Episcopal Migration Ministries has resettled individuals from Ukraine, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Myanmar. We have supported very vulnerable populations from across the globe, regardless of nationality. Since March, a dedicated team of Episcopal Migration Ministries employees have fulfilled our commitment to serve people who arrived just before or in the first days of the new administration. Now that we are ending our involvement in federally funded refugee resettlement, we have asked the administration to work towards a mutual agreement that would allow us to wind down all federally funded services by the end of the federal fiscal year in September. We are working with the affected staff to provide extensive outplacement services and severance packages. Yeah, so the letter then goes on to say, some other things is trying to negotiate with the U.S. government, but that was the main purpose for its refusal to resettle these refugees from South Africa who are Afrikaners, because they argue that that there are other refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Myanmar, from other places in the world, that were affected by the cuts in the refugee resettlement program after January 20th, when President Donald Trump was sworn in and really cancelled that whole program. So now they feel that this process now of redefining the refugee resettlement, especially now with the first project being these Afrikaner refugees, they think that it's an unusual approach to the way they have conducted their resettlement program and management. And so as a result, they really want to take official steps to end their own program, refuse that they wouldn't resettle these Afrikaners and all of that. So that's where this whole case is now at the moment. I think I'm beginning to now understand why some of these actually conflicts around why the preference for the Afrikaners over it actually be as a result of the cuts, the USAID cuts. I think the grants from that USAID program was also supporting some of these refugee resettlement programs. And so now that Donald Trump is trying to redefine how the U.S. government and how the U.S. his regime sees refugee resettlement, or what a refugee is. I think some of their basic focus is on, assimilation. All right. So I think this was a term that came often, during the address by, if you watch my last video, the address by the Secretary of Homeland Security, when he was addressing these new 49 Afrikaners that just arrived 2 days ago, arguing that, urging them to embrace assimilation, to get a job and begin to really settle in, and all of that. So probably there were challenges with assimilation from these other groups that were previously refugees. I know that President Trump always speaks about refugees from the Congo, and I don't know what it is that these refugees from the Congo might have actually done, or how they've represented themselves in the U.S. But I know that during his speeches there have been many mentions of the DRC, and although that there's now a kind of like agreement between the U.S. and the DRC and Rwanda, I think there's even a peace agreement really going on now. The papers are going to be signed, and a minerals deal between the U.S. and the DRC, probably to enforce more peace and use that as a leapfrog to stem the entrance of refugees from the DRC into the U.S. I think the Trump administration now really wants the kind of refugees that would contribute probably to the economic well-being of the U.S., be able to easily assimilate and have no problems with assimilating with U.S. culture, U.S. values and all of that. And I think these Afrikaners, for example, might sit well in that from the perspective. And in terms of values as well, I think also probably religious values and all of that. But then the Episcopal Church finds it really, contradictory to their own values, arguing that this is actually against what the main command they have as a ministry from God, especially as Christians, to really cater for all who are suffering regardless of race or all of that. And so this is where the Afrikaner story is at the moment. But I'm sure that although these Episcopal migration ministries actually would now, I think they seek to really extract themselves totally from that whole refugee resettlement scheme and all of that, with less grants. They lost a lot of their workers and all of that. I think the US would actually find other means to really resettle these Afrikaners and go forward, because Trump is really bullish. And when I say bullish, I'm not saying a bully, but I mean he's really forceful in this redefinition of what it means to be a refugee in his regime, and what refugee resettlement should be in the US, especially as regards assimilation and the addition of value to the economy and probably social well-being of the United States as a society. So this is where I think I'll be stopping for this video. But what do you think about this argument by the Episcopal Church, and then this preference of Afrikaner refugees over other refugees going forward? Share your thoughts, guys. Let's really think. That's what we do in Kwazemy. Let's think. Share your thoughts in the comments.